Autumn wind swept through Union Square Park, carrying a flurry of dry leaves, rustling past the bench where two little twin boys sat in silence. It was early morning in Union Square Park, San Francisco. The air was chilly, and the sun hid lazily behind a veil of thin clouds, casting just enough light to give the drifting fog above the rooftops a soft, silvery glow. On an old wooden bench sat Noah and Liam Bennett, 9-year-old twins, huddled together in thin jackets. Their faces were pale, but their eyes held a quiet, unyielding determination. Between them was a deep, red toy car, a gift from their late father, Jacob, on their birthday last year. Its paint was chipped, its corners worn and cracked, but to Noah and Liam, it was a treasure. The last piece of their father they could still hold on to was a fragile bridge to the man who had been taken from them in a tragic car accident. "Someone will want to buy it, right, Noah?" Liam asked, eyes darting toward the crowd rushing by. Noah tightened his grip on the toy car and nodded silently. His throat was dry, his stomach was hollow. Last night, they had only a few pieces of dry bread to share. But today was different. Today was the deadline to buy medicine for their mother, Elena Bennett, who lay unconscious on a rickety bed in a rundown motel on the outskirts of the city. The doctor had warned them that if she didn't receive IV fluids and treatment soon, her condition could turn critical. "Let's try near the main road," Noah whispered. Liam nodded, and together they made their way toward the busier entrance of the park, where sleek-suited businessmen passed by with AirPods in their ears, joggers weaved through the crowd, and wealthy couples strolled their dogs. People who, in the eyes of Noah and Liam, belonged to a different world, a world of luxury and indifference. The boys stood quietly on the edge of the cobblestone walkway, holding up the toy car. "Excuse me, sir, would you like to buy a toy car?" Noah asked shyly, his voice barely reaching the man in an Armani suit who had just pulled out his iPhone to take a call. The man didn't even glance back. Footsteps kept moving, pitying looks, eyes that quickly turned away. Liam began to tremble from the cold and despair. Then, a sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom came to a quiet stop at the corner, as silent as the shadows. From the back seat stepped Ethan Caldwell, 40, CEO of the tech empire Caldwell Tech. Clad in a charcoal bespoke suit, Italian leather shoes that gleamed like mirrors, and carrying the detached air of a man well acquainted with power. Ethan had intended only to cut through the park on his way to a press conference at the nearby Fairmont Hotel. But something made his steps falter today. A young voice called out, cutting through the city's hum and buzz, "Sir, would you like to buy this toy car? It's very special. Our mom is sick." Ethan froze. He turned around, and for the first time in years, his ice-gray eyes weren't seeing numbers, business plans, or forecasting charts. They were seeing two skinny twin boys with eyes full of desperation and innocence, holding out a scratched-up toy car. He looked at it. A red toy car is clearly used, worthless by most standards. But the way they looked at him, it struck something inside him. A feeling he thought had died with his son Jacob 5 years ago. He crouched down and asked gently, "How much?" Noah looked to Liam, then whispered, "You can give whatever you want, sir. We just need money to buy medicine for our mom." Without thinking, Ethan pulled out his wallet and handed over 5 crisp $100 bills. The small hand trembled as it took the money. Liam carefully placed the toy car into Ethan's palm, like he was giving away a piece of his soul. boys turned and ran off toward the crowded street. Ethan stood still, staring down at the tiny car in his hand. At that moment, something shifted. CEO Ethan Caldwell realized his world had just changed. He turned to his loyal assistant walking behind him. "Andrew, I want to know where they live. Follow them, right now." As Ethan's luxury SUV trailed the two boys through the winding, broken streets of the Tenderloin, San Francisco began to feel unfamiliar to him. No longer the city of numbers and negotiations, but a place of raw truth, poverty, illness, and helplessness. The vehicle stopped in front of a decaying building with peeling paint and windows patched with newspapers and duct tape. Ethan signaled the driver to wait, then stepped out in silence. His hand still gripped the little red car, almost as if letting go would sever the fragile thread tying him to those boys. Inside, the room was nearly bare. A thin mattress lay on the worn wooden floor. A single electric burner sat in the corner, and a woman lay feverish and unconscious. Her hair was tangled, her skin pale, her lips cracked. Ethan immediately saw the resemblance. Elena Bennett, 37 years old. Their mother. No lights, no fan, no medicine, only thin blankets, and a fragile hope fueled by the boundless love of two little boys trying to create a miracle. "She's had a high fever for 2 days now. I tried using cool towels, but it didn't help," Noah said, his eyes red and wet. Ethan said nothing. He simply knelt and placed his hand on Elena's forehead. She was burning up. He stood, pulled out his phone, and turned to the boys. "She needs to go to the hospital right now. I'll take care of everything. Do you trust me?" Liam hesitated, then nodded. Ethan gently lifted Elena into his arms, as if she were a delicate flower on the verge of wilting. At Stanford Hospital, Ethan gave his real name at the front desk. There was no point in hiding anymore. He was Ethan Caldwell, CEO of the multinational tech conglomerate Caldwell Innovations. But at that moment, he wasn't a CEO. He wasn't a millionaire. He was just a man, fighting for the life of a woman he barely knew. A woman who happened to be the mother of the bravest children he had ever met. Doctors diagnosed Elena with acute kidney failure and sepsis. Without immediate dialysis, she wouldn't survive. "Are you a relative?" a nurse asked. Ethan glanced toward the two boys curled up on a bench in the hallway. Then he nodded. "Yes, I'll take full responsibility for her. All expenses, all paperwork, do whatever it takes." And then he signed. A single signature from a CEO, capable of rewriting a destiny. The next day, after Elena had stabilized and was moved to the ICU, Ethan brought Noah and Liam to his private estate in Napa Valley, a sprawling mansion surrounded by vineyards, where only the wind and silence had kept him company for years. Miss Geraldine, his stern and longtime housekeeper, stood frozen when she saw the two skinny boys walk into the grand marble foyer. "Mr. Caldwell, these are my guests," he replied without hesitation, "and they'll stay for as long as they need." At first, the boys were shy and unsure, but within hours, their laughter echoed through the marble halls, filling spaces that had known only stillness and silence for years. From the balcony, Ethan watched as the boys ran through the flower gardens below. And something inside him, something hollow, began to feel full again. Strangely full, undeniably real. That night, when Noah and Liam were fast asleep in a room with windows overlooking the vineyard, Ethan found himself standing before a door that had been locked for years. It was Jacob's room, Ethan's only son, who had died 5 years ago in a car accident. After that loss, Ethan had slammed the door shut on every emotion, burying himself in work, denying the very existence of feeling. He placed his hand on the doorknob, ready to turn it. But then he pulled back. Not today. On the fourth day, Elena was cleared for outpatient care. When she stepped out of Ethan's car, her sons ran into her arms, wrapping around her with pure joy. She looked up in disbelief at the estate behind them. This is your home?" Ethan nodded. "It's your son's home now." I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Just get better." At their first dinner in the mansion, Ethan sat across from Elena. Noah and Liam sat between them, chattering nonstop about the flower gardens, the koi pond, and a library bigger than their entire school. For the first time in 5 years, Ethan genuinely smiled. And Elena. She looked at him with eyes filled not just with gratitude, but with hope. Ever since Elena moved into the Napa Valley estate, the rhythm of the house began to shift. Subtly at first, then unmistakably. Quiet mornings were now filled with the sound of tiny footsteps pounding down the halls, the playful shouts of Noah and Liam as they argued over who got to wear their custom school uniforms first. Arranged by Ethan's assistant, Andrew, along with a full team of private online tutors. Mrs. Geraldine, once a stickler for silence and order, had now mastered making superhero-shaped pancakes and brewing bedtime hot cocoa. Sometimes she even laughed, something Ethan once thought impossible for the no-nonsense housekeeper. Ethan changed too. He began leaving work early to have dinner with them. Some nights, he spent hours helping Noah piece together a model spaceship, or listening to Liam read comic books with dramatic flair. His mansion, once the solitary throne of a successful man, had become a home. One late afternoon, as Ethan sat in his San Francisco office, his assistant Andrew walked in and placed a folder on his desk. "The insurance records and background information on Ms. Bennett, as you requested." Ethan opened the folder and froze. Inside the folder were school transcripts, an old job application, and even a yellowed newspaper clipping from 7 years ago. Elena Bennett, once a top student in product design, had been selected for an internship at his own company, under the new product development division. Ethan flipped to the last page, his eyes pausing on a photograph. A young woman with a high ponytail and eyes brimming with ambition. Suddenly, he remembered. He had seen her before, clearly. Elena was the intern who, years ago, had been fired after a product test mishap, dismissed by a manager without a second chance. And Ethan, he never knew. At the time, he had been too busy at the peak of expanding into Asian markets, far removed from lower-level staff matters. And that young woman back then, she was now the same woman reading bedtime stories to his son's best friends. His instincts stirred. Ethan called Andrew back in. "I want to know who signed off on Elena's termination back then." A few minutes later, Andrew returned, visibly uneasy. It was me, sir. I signed the termination papers, under the directive of the department head, who was later reassigned for multiple instances of misconduct." Ethan didn't speak. He simply nodded. For the first time in his life, he felt an undeniable personal responsibility for those who had been hurt by his silence and inattention. That night, after the whole house had gone to sleep, Ethan stood once again before the wooden door, the one that had stayed locked since Jacob's death. His hand trembled, but this time he turned the knob. The room was untouched. A small bed with sky blue sheets covered in planets. Model airplanes still dangling from the ceiling. And on the desk, a toy car display case. the same one that once held Jacob's favorite red toy car. Now, that car was in the inside pocket of Ethan's suit, the same one Noah and Liam had sold to save their mother's life. Ethan sat down, eyes falling on a photo resting on the nightstand. A family at the beach, him, his wife, and Jacob. Smiling, whole, a happiness that shattered the moment their car flew off the highway. His eyes stung. He whispered, "Jacob, I'm sorry it took me this long to understand what real love looks like." That same night, Liam spiked a fever. Elena panicked. Ethan immediately called his private physician in San Francisco. The entire house stayed awake through the night. When the fever finally broke, Elena sat at her son's bedside. Ethan stepped in, holding a cup of warm water. "The boy's going to be fine." "I know, but I'm not." Elena looked at Ethan. Her eyes were different now, not just grateful, but filled with worry, confusion, and something else she couldn't name. "I can't keep the kids here forever. We need to find our way back to our own lives." Ethan didn't respond. He simply leaned down and placed the red toy car back on the nightstand. "I once lost everything. But those two boys, and you, helped me find my heart again. Don't go." Elena said nothing. Outside the window, a crescent moon hung quietly over the peaceful Napa sky. Elena woke up in a room filled with sunlight. Not the harsh glare of a rundown neighborhood, but a warm, gentle light streaming through sheer white curtains. The faint scent of lavender hung in the air. It took her a few seconds to remember where she was. No more sirens, no cold wind sneaking through cracks in the walls, just the sound of birds chirping and the crystal-clear laughter of two boys drifting in from the back garden. The door opened softly. It was Miss Geraldine, the woman who once looked at her with suspicion, now gently placing a tray of warm porridge on the table. "Noah said you liked chicken porridge. I added a bit of ginger to warm the stomach," she said, her voice far softer than the first time they met. Elena gave her a faint smile and nodded. She couldn't remember the last time someone had cooked for her. Ethan was in his study. He still sat in front of his laptop, charts and growth forecasts covering the screen. But his mind was elsewhere, somewhere in the garden, where two boys were laughing, chasing after a treasure hunt he had set up for them. "Are you sure you want to stay here the whole week?" Andrew Bellamy, his assistant, asked over a video call. "I'm sure." "And the meeting with the Japanese investment fund?" "Postpone it until I say otherwise." Andrew hesitated. For the first time in 10 years working alongside Ethan Caldwell, he watched the CEO cancel his entire schedule just to stay home, not for vacation, but to care for a family he didn't even know. That afternoon, when Ethan brought Noah and Liam to visit their mother at the hospital, the nurses began whispering. "Is that Ethan Caldwell? The Millionaire CEO? What's he doing bringing in a Medicaid patient?" Elena heard them. She gently tugged at his sleeve. "You don't have to do this. I don't want my kids being talked about." Ethan turned to her, his gaze calm but firm. "I'm not doing this out of obligation. I'm doing it because I want to. And if anyone has a problem with that, maybe they should take a long look at themselves." Elena fell silent. In that moment, she realized this wasn't charity. This was a choice. That night, after reading to the boys and tucking them in, Ethan found himself once again standing before the blue door. Jacob's door. He slowly opened it. The room was unchanged. The small bed was covered in galaxy print sheets. Bookshelves filled with adventure novels. Model airplanes still dangling from the ceiling. Dust clung softly to the frame of a photograph, Jacob smiling, nestled between Ethan and his late wife on a beach long ago. He didn't cry, but his chest ached, as if every locked-away emotion was fighting its way back to the surface. He sat on the bed, his hand closing around a toy car, nearly identical to the one Noah and Liam had sold. A soft knock came at the door. "Sorry, I didn't know you were in here." It was Liam, standing in the doorway, eyes cast down. "It's okay," Ethan said gently. "Would you like to come in?" The boy stepped in and looked around. "I guess this was your son's room?" Ethan nodded, his lips barely moving. "His name was Jacob. He passed away when he was 5. Liam was quiet for a moment, then softly said, "My dad died when I was little too. Mom says people never really leave us, as long as we remember them." Ethan turned away, blinking fast to stop the tears. At that moment, a once cold CEO was slowly being pieced back together by a little boy's quiet wisdom. The days that followed passed gently, like sunlight spilling through the vineyard leaves. Elena grew stronger. Color returned to her cheeks, along with a morning routine of cooking breakfast with Ms. Geraldine, who was no longer just a housekeeper, but a dear, older friend. Noah and Liam studied online, with private tutors coming to the estate, arranged by Ethan, of course. On weekends, the family played basketball in the courtyard or sat by the koi pond, drawing pictures and telling stories. One evening, as they sat down to dinner under the vineyard trellis, candles flickering softly in the breeze, Liam suddenly asked, "Uncle Ethan, if one day you married my mom, could we call you Dad?" Elena nearly dropped her wine glass. Ethan froze. No one laughed, no one joked, because it was a question neither of the grown-ups dared to answer. Not yet. 3 days later, the once silent mansion of Ethan Caldwell had transformed completely. Besides his usual morning espresso was a half-empty cup of chocolate milk. On the ebony conference table sat plastic dinosaurs and crayon drawings. Ethan, the man who once ran a global tech empire with unshakable discipline, was now learning how to share his kitchen with 2 twin boys who believed the world was built on imagination. "Uncle Ethan, do you know why the sky's blue?" Liam asked while flipping a toy fish belly up in the sink. Maybe sunlight reflection, or maybe it's magic." Ethan smiled, surprised by the gentleness in his voice. Noah chimed in, face serious. "That's not it. It's because the atmosphere scatters sunlight. I read it in a book." Miss Geraldine walked by, arching an eyebrow at the scene in the kitchen, then gently smiled. She knew better than anyone. This was the first time in 5 years her employer hadn't eaten breakfast alone. Elena, a woman standing between memory and possibility. She was still healing, her steps slow, her breath at times uneven, but the light in her eyes was coming back. Every morning, she sat out on the porch, a book in hand, watching her sons play on the dew-kissed lawn. And sometimes, her gaze would linger on Ethan, the quiet man with unwavering presence. He never pressed her, never asked for stories she wasn't ready to tell. But he was always there, exactly when she needed him most. One late evening, Elena found him in the library, where soft golden lamplight bathed the old books in a warm glow. "I never thought I'd ever live in a place like this," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I never thought I'd hear the sound of children laughing in this house again," Ethan replied. They looked at each other. No words followed, but in the silence, a quiet promise was made. That weekend, while cleaning out the storage room with the boys, Liam stumbled across a small, dusty key. He held it out to Ethan, curiosity sparking in his eyes. What room does this open? Ethan froze as he stared at the key in his palm. It was the key to Jacob's room, the room he hadn't stepped into in 5 years. That night, after the house had gone still, Ethan stood once more before the door. His heart pounded in his chest. He slid the key into the lock. A soft click. Time seemed to stop. The toys were all still there. The little fire truck, the tiny wooden guitar, and on the wall, a crayon drawing of the three of them laughing on the beach. Jacob's family portrait. Ethan sat on the bed, and for the first time in 5 years, he cried, not because of grief, but because, finally, he was strong enough to face it. From that day on, the door to the room was no longer locked. Liam and Noah were allowed inside, but they always entered with a quiet reverence. They didn't touch the toys. They simply stood and listened as Ethan told them stories about Big Brother Jacob, as if the little boy still lived on in every object, every memory. Elena watched it all in silence. She knew a heart had begun to heal. That evening, as she and Ethan cleared the dinner table together, she spoke softly. "You loved your son very much, didn't you?" Ethan nodded, a small nod, yet it carried everything he had ever buried deep inside. Elena smiled. "I believe. Jacob is smiling too." Spring in Napa Valley was always gentle. Soft breezes swept through the emerald vineyards. Lavender bloomed in purple trails along the walkway. Inside Ethan's mansion, a family was quietly forming. Not in the usual way, but in a way that felt unbelievably real. On a quiet weekend morning, Ethan helped Noah and Liam pitch a tent in the backyard. The boys brought everything: walkie-talkies, cookies, a pile of science fiction books. "Uncle Ethan," Liam asked, his eyes serious, "if I ever got lost in the Amazon jungle, would you come find me?" Ethan chuckled. "Not only would I find you, I'd bring a helicopter if I had to." The half-joking answer made Noah burst into laughter. But to two boys who once thought it was just them and their mom against the world, that promise meant everything. Though she was receiving the best care, Elena's health still hadn't fully recovered. The dialysis sessions left her drained, but she never let her boys see. She still read to them every night, still smiled every morning, still prepared their lunches herself whenever she was strong enough. Ethan watched quietly, not with the eyes of a benefactor, but as someone who was slowly, undeniably growing to care for her. She was strong, kind, intelligent, and resilient in a way that stunned him. One late night, as they stood together in the library, bathed in warm lamplight and the hush of old pages, Elena finally spoke. "I know I can't stay here forever," Elena said softly. "Even though you've never said it. I understand. I'm living in a world that doesn't belong to me." Ethan closed the book in his hands and looked straight into her eyes. "Who says you don't belong here?" Elena didn't respond, but in her eyes, something stirred. A few days later, while attending a spring fair in a nearby town with the boys, Ethan realized something. He no longer wanted to keep a distance from them. Noah tugged on his sleeve, pulling him toward the face-painting booth. "Uncle Ethan, be a lion." Liam jumped in. "No, he should be Super Ethan." Ethan laughed, letting the two boys paint color across his cheeks. From a distance, Elena watched, lemonade in hand, watching a once cold CEO now becoming a father in the eyes of her sons. That night, under golden lights in the backyard, the four of them dined beneath a blooming bougainvillea trellis. Ethan suddenly spoke. "If you and the boys would like I could arrange a private wing of the house just for you. Or, if you'd rather be independent, I can help you get a position at our executive office in San Francisco." Elena looked at him. "You want me to stay?" Ethan nodded. "Not out of pity, not out of obligation, but because I want you to." Elena gave a soft smile but said nothing. That night, after tucking the boys into bed, Elena quietly stepped outside into the garden. Ethan was already there, standing near the lavender bushes. "Jacob must have been a wonderful little boy," Elena whispered. Ethan nodded, his voice low and steady. "If he were still alive, he'd probably be the same age as Noah and Liam." "You've never spoken about Jacob's mother." "Her name was Sarah. She was gentle but strong, and I lost them both in a single accident." Elena placed her hand gently over his. No words were needed. The touch was enough to say, "I understand." The first time Ethan truly opened up in 5 years. 1 week later, Miss Geraldine walked into the library and paused. Ethan was sitting with the twins, all three huddled around a model airplane, gluing pieces with exaggerated focus. "Do you know how your mom and I met?" Ethan asked playfully. "No idea," Noah shouted, "but I bet it was while saving the world from giant robots." Laughter erupted through the library. Elena walked by, pausing at the doorway. For the first time, she didn't see a powerful CEO sitting alone. She saw a father, a man who could laugh, a man who had known pain and had chosen to love again. That night, after the estate had gone quiet, Ethan stood outside his office, holding the small red toy car. The same one Noah had handed him in Union Square. Tiny, worn, yet somehow a tether that bound him to all three of them. He unlocked his phone, scrolling through unread emails, million-dollar contracts, IPO roadmaps, messages from Andrew. But they all blurred together. His heart wasn't in the boardroom anymore. It was here, in this house. Footsteps approached behind him. Noah, barefoot, clutched a worn-out teddy bear. "Uncle Ethan, Liam's having a bad dream. He's crying and calling for Dad." Ethan stood instantly. They had never spoken of their father, not once. But the nightmare had summoned that name from somewhere deep. He entered the boy's room. Liam was curled under the covers, sniffling in his sleep. Ethan sat down on the edge of the bed and gently placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Dad, don't go." Liam whimpered in his sleep. "You're okay now, Liam," Ethan whispered, his voice warmer than any deal he'd ever negotiated. "You're safe. I'm here." Liam slowly woke up. His eyes were red and puffy, but when he saw Ethan's face, he let out a soft breath, then threw his arms around him. "I'm sorry. I just dreamed Dad disappeared." Ethan said nothing. He simply held the child tight, as if holding Jacob himself, the son he had lost forever. The Napa Valley mansion began to change. Empty rooms were filled with the boys' drawings. The once silent library now echoed with laughter as Noah and Liam discovered books about dinosaurs and space travel. The garden became their playground of discovery, from planting tomatoes to crafting water rockets out of plastic tubes. Elena, though still recovering, began to glow with new life. Her cheeks took on a healthy blush. Her hair, once loose and tangled, was now neatly tied at the nape of her neck. She returned to the kitchen with Miss Geraldine, cooking simple but fragrant dishes, chicken soup, apple pie. And the house felt warmer than it had in years. One afternoon, just after Ethan wrapped up a call with Andrew, he spotted Elena by the reflecting pond in the backyard. A breeze danced through her pale blue dress, making it shimmer in the sunlight. He approached, holding 2 glasses of lemonade. "Thank you," she said, accepting one. "I should be the one thanking you," Ethan replied, "for bringing laughter back into this place." Elena smiled gently and turned toward him. "There was a time I didn't think I'd ever get back up after losing my husband. But then came Noah and Liam, and now there's you." Ethan said nothing. It wasn't a confession of love, but it struck something deep in his chest, a stillness full of hope. That night, for the first time, Ethan opened the door that had remained locked for 5 long years. Jacob's room was exactly as it had been the day he died. The small bed with space shuttle sheets, bookshelves packed with superhero comics, and on the desk, a picture frame holding a photo of the 3 of them. Ethan, his late wife, and Jacob, all smiling brightly by the sea. He stood in the middle of the room, hands trembling slightly as he touched one of Jacob's old shirts. And then, a soft knock at the door. It was Elena. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude." Ethan shook his head. "It's all right. For the first time in 5 years, I can step in here without falling apart." Elena walked closer, looking around the room. Her eyes were gentle, but not pitying. "Jacob, he looked so happy in this photo. He was my whole world. And now, maybe your world is starting to open up again." Ethan looked at her. She didn't cry. She didn't console him with cliches. She was simply there, present in a way he hadn't realized he needed so deeply. The next morning, Noah and Liam raced through the vineyard behind the house, holding brand new toy cars, gifts from Ethan, after he learned they once gave up their most precious possession to save their mom. Elena sat on a wicker chair on the front porch, a thin shawl wrapped around her shoulders. She was still weak, but there was no more distance in her eyes. Ethan brought her a cup of herbal tea, set it gently on the table, and sat across from her. "You can stay as long as you'd like, Elena. I don't want you to worry about a thing." Elena smiled softly. "I'm used to worrying. Now I'm not quite sure what to do when someone worries for me." At that moment, there was no CEO, no illness, just 2 people, one who had lost a family and one still fighting to hold hers together. That afternoon, Noah looked up at Miss Geraldine with curiosity. "What's the room at the end of the hallway? Why doesn't Uncle Ethan ever open it?" The housekeeper paused, glancing down the long corridor toward the gray door that always remained shut. "That room is special to Mr. Ethan, a place full of memories and a great deal of loss." The children said nothing. They were more sensitive than most adults gave them credit for. That evening, as Ethan sat in his study reviewing financial reports, Liam tiptoed in quietly. "Uncle Ethan, if you're feeling sad, can we sit with you for a while?" Ethan looked up, a little surprised, then smiled and set the documents aside. "Come here." The 2 boys climbed onto the sofa across from him. "You had a son, right? That room, it was his?" Ethan's hands tightened slightly. After a moment, he nodded, eyes distant. "His name was Jacob. He loved toy cars, just like you 2. He was everything to me." Noah gently touched Ethan's hand. "I'm sure Jacob loved you very much, just like we love our mom." For the first time in years, Ethan wept. Not for what he'd lost, but because he felt seen, truly seen, by 2 9-year-old boys. Elena was sitting in the living room, soft yellow light washing over the space. When Ethan walked in, she looked up and saw his eyes still glassy with emotion. "What happened?" she asked gently. Ethan sat down, resting his elbows on his knees, hand over his brow. "The boys. They asked me about Jacob. Elena nodded slowly, her voice deep and calm. I lost someone too. My husband died in an accident when the boys were just 3. It was a car crash, and it was raining. 2 souls, 2 hearts once shattered. But tonight, they sat together, sharing pain like a quiet fire, no longer a wound, but a warmth. The next morning, Andrew Bellamy, Ethan's trusted assistant, arrived at the estate, bringing work documents in a leather folder. When Andrew saw Elena walking from the kitchen with a tray of fruit, he froze. He quickly stepped over to Ethan and pulled him aside into the hallway. Sir, who is that woman? She's a guest, the mother of the 2 boys. Andrew stared at him, confused. What exactly are you doing, sir? Is this personal, or something the company should be aware of? Ethan sighed. I don't know, Andrew. I just know that if I had walked away that day and never turned back, I would have regretted it for the rest of my life. Andrew, who had seen Ethan through the darkest years of his life, finally nodded. All right, then I'll support you however I can. But be careful. If the media catches wind of this, they won't be kind. Ethan remained silent, eyes drifting toward the garden where the boys were playing with Ms. Geraldine. And for the first time in his life, the cold CEO didn't care about the press, the markets, or the shareholders. 3 weeks passed. Elena was recovering well. Doctors confirmed her kidneys were stabilizing, and she only needed outpatient treatment. Meanwhile, the boys were thriving. Ethan had arranged for tutors to come to the house, teaching them not only academics, but also drawing, chess, swimming, and sports. Things they once only dreamed of. One afternoon, as they strolled near the flower garden, Elena said softly, I need to start looking for a job, Ethan. I can't keep living here as a guest. You're not a guest, he replied. This is your home, if you want it to be. Elena looked at him, longer than necessary. Then gently said, Don't say that unless you're sure. Ethan met her gaze with a look he hadn't given anyone since Jacob died. I've never been more sure of anything. The setting sun washed over them. 2 people who had lost everything, now finding themselves in one another. The next morning, soft sunlight streamed into the living room, where the boys were playing chess with Miss Geraldine. She had been strict at first, but within days, their manners and joy had melted her stern exterior. Ethan sat in the library, one hand holding coffee, the other flipping through work files. But his mind couldn't focus. Every time he looked up through the glass doors and saw the boys running across the lawn, he caught himself smiling, without even realizing it. What's happening to me? He wondered. Elena was still recovering. She spent most of her time in her room, reading, resting, and each afternoon, she took quiet walks through the vineyard. Ethan would often run into her by accident, but neither of them had dared to step past the boundary of quiet gratitude. Until one night, when Ethan passed by the hallway and heard the soft sound of crying, he paused. It was Liam's room. The boy lay facing the wall, shoulders trembling. Ethan gently knocked. Liam, what's wrong? Liam turned around, face streaked with tears. I miss my dad. He died when we were 5. Mom says he's always watching over us, but I can't even remember what he looked like. Ethan didn't have the words. He just sat beside him and quietly pulled him into his arms. I'm sure your dad is incredibly proud of you and your brother. I know I am. At that moment, something broke open inside Ethan's heart. The hard layers he'd built since Jacob's death finally began to crack. That night, after silently walking Elena back to her room, Ethan returned to the West Wing, to the one room that had remained closed for 5 years. Jacob's room. The key still sat in the drawer of his desk. His hand trembled as he slipped it into the lock. When the door opened, dust floated in the dim light from the hallway. The blue walls, the galaxy-themed bed sheets, model airplanes hanging from the ceiling. And on the shelf, a toy car identical to the one the boys had once sold him. Ethan sat on the bed, eyes falling on a framed photo resting on the desk. Jacob, curly brown hair with eyes that looked exactly like Noah's. Ethan began to cry, not the tears of weakness, but the long overdue release of a heart that had endured too much for too long. For years he hadn't allowed himself to grieve or to remember. But now, the house was no longer a silent prison. It was a place of laughter, of tiny footsteps, and of hope. The next day, Ethan brought Elena and the boys to the clinic for a follow-up appointment. "Kidney function has improved significantly," the doctor said with a smile. "We'll switch to a lighter outpatient dialysis plan. If this keeps up, she may fully recover." Elena squeezed her son's hands tightly. For the first time, she saw a future that didn't feel so far away. As they walked back to the car, Liam suddenly asked, "Uncle Ethan, can we stay here forever? If Mommy gets better, will you make us leave?" Ethan stopped in his tracks. He looked at Elena. Her eyes flickered with uncertainty. Then looked at the boys, holding their breath, waiting for his answer. He knelt and placed a hand on their shoulders. "This house has never felt warmer than since you came here. If your mom agrees, this place will always be home to the three of you." Elena looked at Ethan. There were things in her eyes she couldn't yet say out loud, but her heart already knew. What was forming between them wasn't charity anymore. It was something growing, real and deep. That night, after dinner was cleared, Ethan stepped out onto the second-floor balcony, overlooking the perfectly trimmed garden. Elena had retired early to rest. Down below, Noah and Liam sat on the porch, wrapped in towels after splashing around the koi pond. The golden light illuminated their faces, their laughter echoing into the quiet night. A sound Ethan hadn't heard in this house for years. He gripped the railing lightly, and in that moment, the heart he thought had turned to stone tugged softly, as if the boy's laughter was knocking gently at his soul. Behind him, a familiar voice spoke. "You shouldn't stay up too late, sir, no matter the reason. Miss Geraldine?" Ethan turned, smiling faintly. For the first time in years, he looked at her, not as a housekeeper, but as a family. "I think I'm starting to feel afraid of what this house would be like again, if it ever went back to being quiet." She nodded slowly, and for once, those firm eyes softened. "I used to believe nothing could reach your heart after you lost young Jacob. But it seems those two boys have done something no one dared dream." Ethan didn't respond, because she was right. And he knew, if he kept running from the past, he'd risk losing the miracle that had just begun. The next morning, after taking Elena and the boys to their regular checkup, Ethan returned to the estate alone. He walked slowly toward the door that had remained locked for 5 years, Jacob's room. His hand trembled slightly as he placed the key in the lock. Click. The light from the hallway spilled in, washing over sky-blue walls still covered in Jacob's childish drawings. A small bed with dinosaur pillows, a half-built model airplane on the desk, and a photograph. Ethan, Sarah, and Jacob on their last beach trip together. He stepped inside for the first time in 5 years. Not to reminisce, but to face it. At that moment, a soft voice came from behind. "Uncle Ethan." Liam stood at the doorway, holding the red toy car, the very one he and Noah had once sold to Ethan at Union Square. He hesitated, then asked, Is this your son's room?" Ethan paused, then nodded. Yes, this was Jacob's room. Liam stepped in quietly, as if afraid to disturb the sacred silence. He walked to the desk and gently placed the toy car down. "I don't think Jacob would mind if I left this here," Liam said softly. "It's kind of like saying thank you. Because if it weren't for him, we wouldn't have met you." Ethan's heart clenched. Without a word, he pulled Liam into a hug. For the first time, he cried for Jacob, not from aching grief, but from the healing kind that comes when pain is finally shared. In the days that followed, life at the estate began to take on the shape of a real family. Elena recovered faster than expected, thanks to attentive care and a specialized diet plan prepared by Ms. Geraldine. The boys received their lessons at home with top tutors Ethan brought in from San Francisco. And Ethan, the man who used to sleep just a few hours a night for work, now woke early to walk the vineyard with the boys, eat breakfast with Elena, or simply listen to Noah spin wild tales about a monster living in the bathtub. One afternoon, as Ethan was reviewing shareholder contracts on a video call with Andrew, Noah burst in. "Uncle Ethan, you promised to teach us chess." Andrew chuckled through the screen. "Sounds like my CEO has his hands full." Ethan laughed. "I suppose the company can wait an hour." And he closed the laptop. One game of chess, one afternoon, and laughter echoing through the living room. Not something CEO Ethan Caldwell used to think was essential. But now, it was everything. That night, the Napa Valley estate didn't sleep. Elena had a relapse, a sudden fever, shivers. Her blood pressure plummeted despite the ongoing treatment. Ethan immediately called the family doctor, then rushed into her room, the boys crying by her side. "She's not breathing right." Noah clutched Ethan's arm, trembling. "Uncle Ethan, is Mommy going to be okay?" Ethan knelt beside him, eyes scanning Elena's fragile frame under the thin blanket. "She's going to be okay. The doctor's on the way. Do you trust me?" This time, there was no hesitant nod like in the early days. Both boys whispered in unison, "Yes, we trust you." Thanks to quick intervention, Elena was stabilized with IV treatment at home. Ethan sat at her bedside through the night, his eyes reflecting a rare and visible fear. In the quiet, his hand reached out instinctively and found hers, cold, but soft and oddly calming. A quiet morning, and a familiar warmth returns. By the next day, the sun was high. The mansion's kitchen carried the sweet scent of baked goods and strawberry jam. Elena, now stronger, stood beside Miss Geraldine, helping with breakfast. "You don't have to do this," Ethan said as he entered, still in his morning workout clothes. "But I need to feel like I'm contributing, even just a little," Elena replied with a smile. "You've already given us everything, Ethan." He opened his mouth to protest, then simply smiled, a rare and slightly bashful one. The boys rushed in. Liam had jam smeared across his face and grinned from ear to ear. "Mom, Uncle Ethan said he's taking us to the greenhouse today. There are purple flowers that change color in the sun." "Really?" Elena turned to Ethan, half suspicious it was a made-up promise. "It's true," Ethan replied softly. "If you're up for it, and feel well enough to come too." That morning, for the first time in years, Elena walked through a sunlit garden. Besides two excited children and a man who watched her silently, never once looking away, later that afternoon, while the boys played in the yard with the estate's golden retriever, Max, a dog raised lovingly by Miss Geraldine. Elena wandered through the gleaming wooden hallways of the house. She paused at a closed door, painted a soft ash gray. She was about to turn away when she caught Ethan watching her from the end of the hall. He walked over slowly, stopping a few steps from the door. "This room, it's special to me," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. "I wasn't trying to intrude." "I know," he said gently, "but I'm still not ready to open it." Elena said nothing, but in her eyes there was an unspoken understanding. No questions, no pressure, just presence. The quiet kind you offer when someone needs it most. That evening, when Noah began to sniffle, missing the father he barely remembered, Ethan sat down beside him. He didn't say a word. He simply wrapped his arms around both boys, letting their tears soak silently into his shirt. "I wish Dad were still here," Noah whispered. "But now we have you, and Mom smiles more since she met you." Ethan froze. Something inside him, frozen for 5 years, began to melt. 2 more weeks passed. The once quiet estate had transformed into a real home. The kitchen always smelled of something warm. Laughter echoed down the hallways. The refrigerator was covered in crayon scribbles. Chessboards lay mid-game in the living room. And Ethan, the once cold CEO who lived by schedules and billion-dollar deals, was now in the garden, helping 2 little boys build a rabbit hutch. One evening, after cleaning up, Elena walked into the library. She found Ethan staring at a red toy car displayed neatly on the shelf. "You never gave it back," she said gently. Ethan nodded, eyes distant. "It reminds me of the day I stopped living, and the day I started again." Elena didn't respond. She simply stood beside him, close enough that neither of them felt alone anymore. That night, after a warm dinner with Elena and the boys, Ethan retreated to his study. But he couldn't focus. His mind kept drifting. To Elena, her long black hair, the way candlelight reflected in her eyes, half shy, half soft, and wholly real. He rose and walked the familiar path to the end of the second-floor hallway. To the oak door he hadn't opened since Jacob's death. His hand trembled as he fitted the key into the lock. But this time, he wasn't alone. From the top of the stairs, Elena saw him standing there, bathed in warm golden light. She walked to him quietly. No questions, just standing beside him. Ethan opened the door. The room hadn't changed. It was as if time had stopped on that fateful day. A half-finished crayon drawing still clung to the wall. A poster of the solar system. Rocket ship sheets. A small model rocket resting on the desk. Ethan stood in silence, as if he'd opened the door to a sacred past. Before he could stop her, Elena stepped inside. She moved softly, eyes slowly taking in every detail, until they landed on a framed photo on the shelf. Jacob, Ethan, and a woman. She guessed it was his wife. "She's beautiful," she whispered, brushing a finger against the frame. "And the boy, he has your eyes." Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, shoulders heavy. "We crashed on a rainy day. I was driving. A truck ran a red light." His voice cracked, caught in his throat. "They died, and I survived." Elena said nothing. She simply sat beside him, placing her hand gently on his, a gesture without words, yet one that let the cracks in him begin to open, so light could get in. "I thought I died with them," Ethan whispered, voice trembling. I just was never buried. I built a wall between me and the world, treated emotion like a luxury, until I met two little boys selling a toy car and their mother. Elena turned to him. Her eyes shimmered, not with tears, but with something bigger, understanding. You're not dead, Ethan. You were just waiting for someone to wake you up. From that day forward, Jacob's room was never locked again. Noah and Liam were allowed to enter Jacob's room, but only if they didn't touch the rocket model. One morning, Liam quietly slipped a small note beneath Jacob's photo frame. The handwriting was crooked and slanted. I don't know if I'm allowed, but if you'd like, I'm willing to share Dad with you. Ethan found the note while tidying the desk. He sat for hours, motionless, the small piece of paper trembling in his hands. Perhaps the greatest gift he had ever received. A heart healed by the trust of a child. One night, after Noah and Liam had gone to sleep, Elena stepped onto the balcony. Ethan was already there, holding 2 cups of hot cocoa, as if he had known she would come. "Were you planning to say something?" she asked. "Maybe," Ethan replied. "Or maybe I just wanted someone to share a quiet night with." She accepted the cocoa and took a gentle sip. The silence between them flowed like a cool breeze across the vineyard. "What are you most afraid of, Elena?" Ethan asked. "Hoping," she said quietly, believing that something good might stay. He nodded slowly. "Same here. Until one old toy car and 2 little boys made me break every rule I ever lived by." She turned to look at him. He reached for her hand for the first time. Not shaking, not hesitant. "You gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. Feeling, faith, and a reason to come home." Elena didn't answer. She simply tightened her grip on his hand, as if to promise that they would walk forward together, through half-finished dreams, through unhealed wounds, and through hopes they once dared not name. Dad. One word, enough to change a heart forever. That morning, it was gently raining. Raindrops tapped softly against the windows of the Napa Valley estate, leaving streaks of mist like Ethan's own lingering thoughts. He stood in the kitchen, fumbling with a pot of oatmeal, Liam's favorite, but only if there's lots of honey. Behind him, small footsteps echoed. Noah entered, hair tousled from sleep, still wearing his spaceship print pajamas. "Good morning," Ethan smiled. "Hungry?" Noah nodded but didn't move closer right away. He paused, then whispered, barely audible, "Dad." Ethan froze. One word, just one. But it hit him like a fire melting through a long winter. He turned around, locking eyes with those sea-glass green eyes. Liam shuffled in behind Noah. Both boys stood there, uncertain, as if they'd done something immense. And they had. Can we call you that?" Liam asked, barely above a whisper. "If you don't want us to, it's okay." Ethan knelt, arms open. "You can call me that whenever you're ready. And if today is that day, then Dad is honored." The boys ran into his arms. Tears fell from Ethan's eyes onto their shoulders. No words were spoken, but everyone understood. A family had truly begun in that moment. 2 weeks later, Ethan brought Elena and the boys to San Francisco. Not to the office, but to Hillcrest Cemetery, where his son Jacob was laid to rest. Elena held his hand tightly as they passed through the iron gates. The boys walked closely beside them, unusually quiet. Each step down the narrow stone path stirred memories in Ethan's chest. Spring visits with fresh flowers, winters where he stood from afar, too afraid to come closer. But today, for the first time, he wasn't alone. The gravestone read, "Jacob Ethan Caldwell, 2014 to 2019. Son, little friend, a brief light in a long life. Ethan knelt, hands resting gently on the stone. He was no longer the CEO, no longer the stoic man who ran an empire, but a father learning how to forgive life and himself. Elena stepped forward, gently placing a bouquet of lavender, Jacob's favorite, on the grave. Noah and Liam sat beside the stone, hands clasped. Then Noah spoke as if to an old friend he'd just met. "I'm Noah, and this is Liam. Dad, our dad, told us you loved space. We do too." Liam added, "If you were still here, we'd probably be great friends. But we promise to take care of Dad, even if we're not as good at it as you." Ethan buried his face in his arms. He couldn't hold back the tears anymore. Elena knelt beside him, wrapped her arms around his shoulders, and for the first time in all those years, Ethan no longer felt alone at his son's grave. That afternoon, the family returned to the estate. Noah and Liam ran across the lawn, starting a new imaginary game, this time with Jacob included. They called it Caldwell Exploration Team, 3+1 Angel. Elena stood at the window, quietly watching the boys. Ethan stepped beside her and wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Thank you," he whispered, "for walking with me to the hardest place and staying." Elena rested her head against his shoulder. "We can't erase the past, Ethan, but we can rewrite the present." Ethan pulled her closer. "And if you'll let me, I want to write it to you, forever." That day was a crisp, golden autumn afternoon. Sunlight spilled over the grape-laden vines of Napa Valley. And Ethan had been preparing something for days. Not flashy, not extravagant. It was nothing grand. Just a small wooden table beneath the grapevines, 2 glasses of light wine, and a tiny velvet box resting quietly in Ethan's suit pocket. Elena had no idea. She walked out into the back garden where Ethan was waiting, her hair loosely down, hands still dusted with flour from baking apple pies that afternoon with Miss Geraldine and the boys. "What did you want to talk about?" Elena asked with a soft smile, pausing when she noticed the small table set for 2, candles already flickering gently in the dusk. "I wanted to thank you for coming into my life," Ethan said. "I'm not going anywhere," she replied, half joking. "The pie's still in the oven." Ethan laughed, soft and breezy, like the early autumn wind. "Elena, there's something I've wanted to do for a long time. But I was afraid. Not because I wasn't sure, but because I never thought I'd get a second chance." She stilled when he stepped forward and pulled out a small black velvet box. Inside was a vintage French ring, a deep green emerald encircled by delicate diamonds, timeless, elegant, and filled with meaning. "Elena Bennett, you and your boys walked into my life like light through the darkness I'd kept myself in for far too long. You didn't just save me. You made me want to live again, to believe in love, in home." He knelt, voice deep but trembling. "I can't promise perfection, but I can promise to always try. Not just to be your husband, but to be the best father Noah and Liam could ever hope for. Will you marry me, Elena?" There was no music, no fireworks, just the whisper of wind through the vines and the golden glow of sunset on her hair. Elena brought her hands to her mouth, tears glistening in her eyes. Then, slowly, she nodded, smiling through the tremble. "Yes, Ethan." He slid the ring onto her finger, so gently, as if touching something sacred. And right at that moment, the sound of small feet echoed behind them. "Mom, Mr. Ethan, the pie's done," Liam shouted. Wait. Mom, are you crying?" Noah tilted his head, then spotted the ring. Elena laughed through her tears, kneeling to hug her sons. Ethan joined her, placing a hand gently on their shoulders. How would you feel if we became a real family? Noah looked up. You mean, you and Mom getting married? Elena and Ethan exchanged a glance, then smiled. Can we be the groomsmen? Liam shouted. Absolutely, Ethan said with a nod, then added gently, and if you're ready, you can call me Dad, like you did before. Noah threw his arms around him. We've been calling you that for a while now. We just hadn't said it out loud yet. The moon had risen, casting silver light over the vineyard. And amid the vines of Napa Valley, a new family began a brand new chapter, one called To Love and Stay. Spring came late to Napa Valley that year. Cherry blossoms quietly unfolded over the cobblestone path through the gardens, a soft pink veil, as if even time itself wanted to tread gently on the new peace blooming at the estate. A month after the wedding, a ceremony not grand, but rich in warmth, laughter, and the bright-eyed sparkle of two tiny groomsmen. Ethan had become a different man. He no longer rose at 5 a.m. He no longer buried himself in deals like he was running from something. Now, he woke up with Noah and Liam, or more accurately, was woken up by giggles and the joyous chaos of the morning attack. Wake up, Daddy Ethan. Mom says today's picnic day at the lake. Ethan groaned playfully, diving under the blanket. But the two boys pounced on him, clambering all over. Okay, I give up. Laughter rang through the bedroom, where sunlight spilled through the white curtains, catching in the tousled strands of Elena's hair as she stepped in, carrying a tray of freshly made pancakes. Are the gentlemen ready? She teased. Because, if not, I might just eat all the pancakes myself. Ethan pulled all three of them into his arms, his heart warming in a way he had never imagined possible before. Married life wasn't always candles and wine. But Ethan learned to treasure the ordinary moments most. Helping Liam with math homework, both of them scratching their heads before bursting into laughter. Watching Noah carefully lead the small puppy they'd adopted out to the yard, teaching it to sit. And every night, Elena rested her head on his shoulder in the library, reading to the boys, pages turning. And so did his heart. One evening, after an afternoon of gardening, Ethan sat beneath the old olive tree, watching Elena and the boys laugh as they watered the plants. He turned to Miss Geraldine, always stern, always observant, and said, I never thought I'd live like this, and now I don't want to live any other way. She smiled softly, then said something Ethan would never forget. You haven't changed, Ethan. You've just finally found who you are. When the school year came to a close, Noah was chosen to give a speech at the end-of-year ceremony. He stood on stage, hands shaking slightly, eyes locked onto Ethan and Elena in the front row. I want to thank my mom for always loving us and sacrificing so much for Liam and me. Then, after a pause that seemed to hold the whole room, and I want to thank Dad Ethan for showing up at just the right time. You didn't have to be the one who gave me life, to be the one I trust the most. Ethan's eyes burned. He squeezed Elena's hand. She too was holding back tears. I love you both so much. The audience stood and applauded. But for Ethan, time had stopped, and every scar in him felt soothed by those simple words. That weekend, the family went for a picnic in a meadow a few miles from the estate. They brought sandwiches, apple juice, and a red checkered blanket. Noah and Liam played soccer with Ethan, while Elena sat on the edge of the grass, capturing every moment with an old camcorder. As the sun dipped low, the four of them lay on the blanket, watching the sky fade into violet. You know, Elena whispered, squeezing his hand. Life may never be perfect, but right now it is. Ethan held her closer. Little Liam rolled over and hugged him, whispering, Dad, Ethan. I think Thomas is smiling from up there too. Ethan closed his eyes, letting emotion wash through him with each breath. Yes. Jacob must be watching somewhere and smiling. A family isn't made by blood, but by love and by choice. 1 year later, in the summer garden, it was a gentle summer afternoon. Soft sunlight danced through the vineyard, breeze carrying the fresh scent of newly blossomed lavender. In the western garden, where Ethan had once placed a wooden bench beneath the old oak, now stood white ribbons fluttering in the wind, a rustic outdoor table dressed in linen, and mason jars filled with wildflowers. Today was Ethan and Elena's first anniversary. Elena stepped out from the veranda, holding a bouquet of wildflowers Noah and Liam had picked that morning. She wore a simple white dress that swayed in the breeze, her chestnut hair tied back, her eyes radiant. Ethan stood waiting, hands in his pockets, his gaze never leaving her. They'd been married for a year, but watching her approach still made his heart race like the very first day. You're more beautiful every day, Ethan whispered as she reached him. That's because every day I wake up inside a real-life fairy tale, she replied, smiling gently. Noah and Liam came running out of the house, each carrying a cupcake made by Miss Geraldine. Happy anniversary, Mom and Dad, Noah shouted. Mom, the fact you survived a whole year with Dad Ethan deserves a trophy, Liam added, sending the whole family into fits of laughter. Ethan pulled his sons close, ruffling their hair, then wrapped Elena into his arms as well. Thank you, he said softly, for coming into my life, for staying, and for loving me, so I could finally learn how to love again. Elena rested her head on his shoulder and whispered, We didn't find each other by luck. We found each other by choice, and by the courage to hold on. As night fell, the family gathered around the glow of a small campfire. On the table was a modest cake with a simple message written in frosting. To our second chance. Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a familiar red toy car, the one the boys had once tried to sell. You still have it, Elena said, smiling. I couldn't let it go, Ethan replied. It was the beginning of everything good. He handed it to Noah and Liam. I think it belongs to you two. The boys held the car quietly, their eyes bright, and deep down, they understood. Family isn't just made by blood. It's made by those who never walk away. That night, as everyone returned to their rooms, Noah whispered before the lights went out. Mom, I think Thomas is watching us from somewhere up there. Elena nodded gently. I believe he is, sweetheart. Ethan stood by the doorway, watching the boys as they drifted into sleep, his heart swelling with a quiet conviction. Jacob, his son, wasn't truly gone. Thomas was smiling from another place, knowing that his father had finally found his way back to love. Outside the window, moonlight poured across the roof, echoing with the joyful echoes of children's laughter. And in that room, there was no more loneliness. Only peace, only love, and something that could truly be called home. Because real love doesn't require shared blood, only a heart brave enough to open again. Because sometimes, one small toy car can change the fate of 4 lives. If you believe that a small act of kindness can change someone's entire world, if you've ever shed a tear knowing that goodness and compassion still exist in this world, Then subscribe to our channel and join us in sharing stories that touch the heart. Stories of humanity, of hope, of things we thought were lost, but somehow found again. Click subscribe and the little bell beside it so you won't miss any of the emotional journeys we'll take together. Because sometimes just one story can change a heart.